Anita, how's your mental health?
Questionable at all times. You know this.
Yeah, how's the mental health of your children?
Also a little bit tricky. Can I tell you my experience in trying to find therapists for myself and my kids, Mel?
Yes, please.
Okay, this is how it goes. You ask around your friends and your family for a referral for somebody who's nearby. You finally find somebody who sounds like they might work for your family. You give them a call and you find out that A, they're not accepting new patients, or B, they have a huge wait list. So you start over again and you ask people if they know anybody who would be a good therapist and a good fit. Finally, you find one, you go and you meet with them, and you figure out that you don't actually like them that much. But it's been so much work to find somebody who you can go to in your area that you're kind of stuck with them. Well, do you have any ideas for how to get around this?
I do because guess what? I've actually had some therapists that I have found on my own, which involves what you're saying. Sometimes I remember one time I was like 3 hours in the bathtub on my phone looking
Yeah.
through websites. I was such a prune at the end. But I have also had the experience with working with BetterHelp. And it was like, I don't want to say too good to be true, but because it is true, but it's like amazing because I was matched with my therapist within 24 hours.
And you didn't have to go through all of that other ridiculous process of trying to find somebody. And here's the cool thing too, is if that person didn't work out for you, you can just switch and say, and it's not like you're committing to another years long search for somebody who you're going to jive with.
It's true. And I lucked out, or maybe just BetterHelp is really good at matching people together because I never had to change my therapist. I loved her. Perfect fit for me. And I know that some of our friends have used BetterHelp and they've had to change therapists, and boom, same day, you can change.
Easy peasy.
You can ghost your therapist. Get a new one.
I love this idea. BetterHelp is one of our sponsors. If you use our promo code trybetterhelp.com/WWDN, you get 10% off your first month. And we totally recommend it.
Yes, get some therapy. That's trybetterhelp.com/WWDN.
Okay. Well, I think we should get right into it and have our guest introduce themselves. Who are you?
Hello. My name is Kimberly Shelledy. I'm originally from Minnesota, and in college, I fell in love with a boy and followed him to Iowa. So I'm currently residing in just south of Des Moines, Iowa, and I'm an office manager. My prior life was in insurance and couldn't pretend I liked it or enjoyed it after COVID. And so, yeah, so now I'm an office manager, and a lot of my job is planning events and taking care of people, which fits better.
Are you a Kimberly? A Kim? A Kimmie? A Kimmish? What are you?
Well, you missed one. Actually, my brother calls me Kimbo. Normally, I'm a Kimmie. I'm kind of a big cartoon character.
That's great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Kimmie. We're excited to talk to you and hear a little bit more about your story.
How old are you, Kimmie?
I am, I don't, how old am I? You stop keeping track, guys. I think this is the year of the sevens. I think I turn 47. My parents turned 77. That's actually how I remember.
What age were you when you became widowed?
I was widowed at 43.
It's so funny because I can't remember how old I am, and I'm like, well, I'm 35. I'm always 35.
Right. Yeah, I have no idea. I know I'm not 50, and I know I got to the age that's older than he made it. And after that, my brain is fuzzy.
Yeah.
It's information it doesn't care about. It doesn't need to know.
Yeah.
It's like whatever.
We need to know about this person who died. Who is he?
Michael Shelledy. He was 43 when he passed. He may have had a headache the day before, maybe. And then he didn't come to bed. And about 3 hours into bedtime, so maybe around 12 or 1, I noticed the bed was still cold, but I looked up and the master bedroom bathroom light was on. I was like, oh, he must be having tummy trouble, and fell back asleep. And then at 3:30, I woke up. The bed was still cold. The light was still on, and I knew something was wrong. And that was February 10th of 2020.
So just about to go into the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, fun
Yeah,
times.
that became a huge adventure. In many respects, we got a funeral. Everybody got to come. My family's from Minnesota, his family's from Missouri and elsewhere across the country. But then, yeah, around St. Patty's Day, as you guys remember, the world shut down and the kids were out of school and they're grieving and counseling was canceled. And I'm like, how do I do this? Right. Um, and Yeah, that was a rough couple months, but yeah, no symptoms, no signs. He wasn't the healthiest individual. He had worked out on and off over the years, but he was a smoker. I was closet smokers. We never smoked in the house, never smoked around the kids.
Did they know? Was it like secret closet smoker?
They figured it out in 2018.
What?
So yeah, yeah. When he died, they were 12 and 18, or 12 and 14, excuse me. And we would just say, you know what, mom needs a brain break, and I'm going to go outside and breathe the fresh air, which is so ironic,
It's
right?
like the opposite of what was happening.
Right. And then and then we take our little breaks and come back in, and they I'm sure we smelled, but they never put two and two together, and we lucked out for a long time. But yeah, they said obviously smoking was a contributing factor to his death. He died of a cerebral brain aneurysm, so a berry aneurysm. Um, Found him sitting upright, reading glasses on the tip of his nose, nothing disturbed, and he was not the right color.
What? That's like a walking into a creepy wax museum or
Oh,
something.
the EMDR I had to do about, first of all, opening doors when nobody answers, and then walking in and being like, oh, you are blue and pale and your lips are swollen. Yeah, it was brutal.
Where was he? Was he in the bathroom?
He was.
Okay.
Oh
And
gosh.
there are many jokes about this because early in his life, Mike was a Elvis impersonator. His mom did the
No.
sequins costumes. I know. And his friends, his high school friends who he was still close with, joked about it all the time. Like, well, at least he died like Elvis. Um,
Oh, no way.
oh
That's
yeah,
not
no, the
wrong. Yeah.
the dark humor is horrible. But yeah, no,
Also,
go
I Elvis was not that old when he died. I
right.
thought he was older than he was, and my kids were asking one day, they were like, who was older when they died, Michael Jackson or Elvis or Prince? And I was like, well, Elvis was way older than any of them. And we looked it up, and he was only like 42 or 43 also.
Right.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
So I mean, these guys were the same.
Yeah. But the morning of, yeah, I knocked on the door. He didn't answer. And I finally said, Mike, I'm opening the door. And because he was the color he was, um, I went, we kept all our cell phones in the kitchen at the time. So I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the cell phone, called 911. And he said, you need to get him on his back. And this is like one of those bathrooms where you can touch both walls while you're in there.
Yeah.
The toilet is in the corner to make room for it. Um, and then Mike was 6'1", probably 280 at the time. And
So you had plenty of room, is what you're saying.
yeah, totally. So much space. And I'm Superwoman, can totally lift that kind of weight, right? But yeah, I tried to lift him and I couldn't. And that's when I almost panicked. And he's like, no, try again. You could save his life. Just try again. And he's like, if you have to hurt him to move him, doesn't matter, move him. And so I got him laying down. So he was half in the bathroom, half in the bedroom. And he started talking me through compressions. And then check for a pulse, check for breathing, all that stuff. it's all out of order now, of course, in my brain. But they asked me if the ambulance would find the house. And I said, yeah, it's very simple. And I said, but the door's unlocked and we have a very large 120-pound Labrati. And she was super kind, but super, yeah, part lab, part Rottweiler.
Oh, okay. I pulled a face. I
Yeah.
was like, a Labrati?
Yeah.
That sounds made up.
Yeah.
And it is.
It is. She was 7 years old at the time and she was great with guests, but she looked like a big black wolf. I mean, she was scary looking. So he said, is there anyone you can call for? And I said, yeah, I can yell for my kids. And I yelled and I yelled and they didn't come. And so I asked him what I should do. And he said, go unlock the door, wake up the kids, put the dog in a room. And so I did that and I'm banging on the walls. And Jack is up in the attic level. He's my oldest. My youngest was on my way back to the bedroom. And I said, wake up, get some clothes on. Something's happened with dad. And then I said, can you lock up the dog in Lily's room? Lily is her dead name. I have my youngest child is transgender and is now Ash. But then they walked into the room of me. First of all, dad is not the right color. Second of all, dad is not responsive. Third of all, dad is naked. Because he was on the toilet, right?
Fun. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm giving compressions. And I said, here's what's going to happen. I said, the ambulance is going to come. I need you to put on clothes and then come back here. And then I said that to the youngest. I said, Jack, can you wait at the door for the paramedics? And then they came in and moved him and took over, started asking me questions, asked the kids to go to the living room. And then they said, who can we call? And the first people I thought of was my in-laws. We live in Mike's hometown, but my in-laws were on vacation in Florida. So I'm like, okay, next closest family member is Mike's only sibling, Chrissy. And she was about 10, 15 minutes away. And they called her. He said, why don't I call? He called about 8 times, 9 times. He said, who else do you have? So then we started calling Lucas's phone, which was her husband. And then finally, while they were trying to reach Lucas, Chrissy called back. Everybody's habit, is to turn your phone on silent or sleep at night. And nobody, until you have an emergency, realizes you can set that option to have the cell phone ring through. Anyway, make a long story short, they finally got a hold of Chrissy and she said she was on her way. And then we sat and waited for news. And eventually, I heard them calling somebody saying, yeah, it's been 12 minutes. You should probably come. And then the next thing I knew, somebody else had walked in my house, and it was the man to tell me that Mike was dead, that he had been dead for a few hours. My initial reaction was rage. Like, you're not even going to take him to the hospital. You're not even going to even try, right? Like, come on, this is your job.
Mm-hmm.
And because we didn't know what killed him at that point. And then all 3 of us started sobbing. Chrissy his sister had not arrived yet. And I thought I was going to throw up. Jack started punching cabinets in the kitchen. And Ash just sat on the couch sobbing. And like I said, they were 12 and 14. And then Chrissy walked in and I told her what was going on. The guy who walked in, the coroner, I'm assuming, I'm not sure what his role was. I don't remember his title, but I said, do we get to see him before you take him? And they said, yes. And so I asked Chrissy, I said, do you want to come with us? And Ash said, he doesn't smell like him anymore. And Jack said, at least he looks the right color, because we didn't realize that CPR would get his body, the blood flow back, and he wouldn't be the wrong color anymore. That pale with the blue lips. And um, I asked Chrissy if she wanted a moment alone, and she said no. And then I asked for a moment alone. And yeah, and then they took him out. And I think I was still in denial that he could be resuscitated until that last goodbye, right? When they gave me that minute alone with him.
So, from an outsider's perspective, somebody who hasn't experienced loss like we have, listening to you tell that story, you were very just matter of fact about a lot of that. And you hinted at this, but it probably hasn't always been that way that you've been able to talk about that so calmly. Is that true? Or has it always been something that you've been able to just kind of be calm and detached from?
I've found out this is not the first experience with death, but I've had two kind of minor emergency situations in my life. The first was I had a cat get stuck in new construction at my house when I was a teenager, and my mom is panicking, freaking out, and dad's at work. And all of a sudden, we're listening to the meows or whatever, and I see her whiskers. And mom's like, "Oh my God, what do we do? Let's call your dad." And I'm like, "Mom, get a screwdriver. Get a screwdriver. We're going to unscrew the vent. Cat's going to come out. We're going to replace the vent. We're going to block off how she got in." Right? That was the first. The second, which is a very funny story, I completely accidentally ran over my husband. Just his foot. Just his foot.
Okay.
But we were getting out for work, and I was dropping him off, and then I was going to back out and park. And he stopped after he shut the door to put on an extra layer. And I started backing out and rolled over his foot. Well, he started pounding on the hood, and I stopped the car, like, "What's going on?" I stopped the car on his foot.
Did it break it?
No. So
I've
when
often
he's
wondered
like,
that.
"You're on my foot, you're on my foot." So then I continued backing out, took him to the emergency room. It was just badly bruised, nothing broken. It was shocking. But so I'd had these two random experiences, right? So when I found Mike, my immediate response was, "Where do I go? How do I get help?" I ran to get the phone. I called the number. He told me what to do. I couldn't do it. I almost panicked. He told me to try even if I hurt him. And then while I'm doing compressions and the kids aren't answering and I can't wake them up, in my head, I'm like, if you panic, he could die. I didn't realize he was dead, right? And I knew I just had to keep compressions. And then I had to get the house unlocked. And I focused on the immediate, right? Um, and then, of course, there's, as you guys know, there's a ton of guilt. Should I have seen something the day before? Should I have gotten out of bed the first time I noticed the bed was cold? Should I have checked on him and asked him, but he was, and we can talk about this later, but he was touchy. It was hard to ask him if he was okay because he got angry. So I didn't want to pester him. And so then I kept thinking, but had I checked on him that first time, would I have saved him?
Sometimes we assume that unless we had a huge life insurance payout, we don't really need to know anything about investments or even finances. But guess what? A little knowledge of finances is critical for all of us. Maybe your partner was in charge of that stuff, and now you find yourself making all the decisions. Maybe you're mad about that. Maybe I am. Nicole from the He's Gone But the Money's Not podcast is here to help. She tackles financial literacy by telling the stories of women and widows and finance experts and shares the lessons they've learned as certified financial planners. Whether you know a lot and feel confident in your financial decisions or feel unsure about all of that stuff, there is more to learn. Listen and subscribe to the He's Gone But the Money's Not podcast on all podcast platforms. This ad was paid for by Rock House Financial, an SEC registered investment advisor. So let's rewind a little bit and
Yeah.
talk about what your relationship was like.
Yeah. Um, so I met Mike at Luther College. Um, my first experience with him is we both had solos in our respective choirs freshman year at Luther College, vocal
Oh,
solos.
choir
Choir.
love.
Right? Almost, because there was a boys' choir and a girls' choir. And all the girls were like dying over this guy. And I don't know if you've seen the pictures, but he had this hair and he was beautiful. He was a very pretty man. And then he had this voice. And I'm like, oh, you guys are such dorks. Like, you can't just obsess over the one gorgeous, talented guy, And then I remember joking, how much time does he spend on that hair? He probably spends more time on his hair than I do on my entire hair and makeup thing. And yeah, so that was my first encounter with him. But then we made Nordic Choir our sophomore year, which was the elite choir for choral music, and became friends. Got in the same friend group, and he was a huge nerd. He had no problem making a huge fool of himself. When we were bored, waiting in the calf lines, he'd like do this ape impression to entertain us, right? Like, and I thought, this is a man who will never take life seriously as a good or a bad, right? And I was actually interested in his best friend, who became our best man. Funny story. Um, but yeah, eventually it worked out that we ended up dating. And then I had a really bad second semester of sophomore year. It I was failing. I didn't know why. Turns out I was ADHD, undiagnosed. I wasn't stupid. I just didn't know how to focus. And so I left Luther and then didn't really talk to anybody for a few months. And then I reached out to him and we started dating long distance. And then the short version of the Kimmie Mike story is that we got engaged. We planned a wedding. We called off a wedding. He proposed again after I read him a 10-page letter of how he had disappointed me, and then said, you can plan the next wedding. You missed the first one. So he made all the calls for the second wedding, which ended up being about 4 months after the first. It wasn't a huge thing, but it was quite the story to even get married. But yeah, I thought he was way too pretty. I thought being so talented, he'd be full of himself. And he was a big cartoon. Everybody loved him.
He sounds super fun.
He was super fun. And what I slowly realized is Mike's friends and whoever Mike is wooing saw that side of him. After we had kids, got married, got jobs, fun Mike didn't live at home.
Hmm.
And that was really hard and very confusing. So when the kids were infants, he would sing to them, obviously, the lullaby from the Three Amigos, right? Like opera, whatever came to his head, right? Little Harry Connick, little Frank Sinatra. I mean, these were the most spoiled kids musically ever in terms of lullabies. But like if I had a girls' night out or I had to work late, Mike would end up at his folks' house with the kids because we live in his hometown. His parents at the time lived a block apart, but it wasn't like Everyone Loves Raymond. Like they were very busy working social people. We had to schedule babysitting ahead of time, right? But every time I had something, he'd end up over there with the kids. But he still, like with the Exer Saucer dinosaur, he had an Arabic accent. And then, like when they would ride on his knee, he'd break out his Southern accent for rawhide. He was a fool for them until, yeah, about age 4. And then he was like bored because they couldn't do anything, right? He couldn't teach him to golf. He couldn't teach him to t-ball. They couldn't do piano yet. They couldn't play video games yet. So yeah, they ended up at grandma and grandpa's. Then eventually, I noticed my youngest in particular would beg me, Mom, will you take me to dance? Will you take me to piano? And I said, sure. I didn't think about it at the time, but eventually I'm like, baby, why? And at the time, Ash was she. So she was like, I would rather you drive. And Jack, so Jack was born John, but we call him Jack. Jack was just starting to dislike some of the things that Dad expected of him, right? Flag football, sports in general, band, piano, anything that Dad expected or I expected. I said, you do something musical, you do something for your body. It doesn't matter what, right? And then we wanted readers, so we didn't introduce a lot of tech early on. Jack started to talk to me about how he wanted to quit things. And I said, okay, I'll talk to your dad and maybe we can talk to your dad. And it was about Jack was 4th or 5th grade when Jack started having anger outbursts at school. And I got him into therapy. And out of that therapy came I can't talk to my dad. I had been in therapy on and off since I was diagnosed with ADHD at 19. And I'm like, how do I navigate this? So I asked Mike, I'm like, would you consider being in counseling with us? And he did not believe in therapy. He thought it was voodoo. He didn't want our kids tested for various challenges. He didn't want them on medication. He didn't want them classified as anything. So initially I did it behind his back. Yeah.
So we've talked to other people, and just from my own life experience, I know that we sometimes expect that people who have mental illness have had it their whole lives, but sometimes it does develop later in life. Do you think that maybe that played a part in how he acted later in his life?
I absolutely do. So the conclusion to getting both kids in therapy was that Jack was ADHD and obviously a people pleaser, takes after his mom in that respect. Ash was high functioning autistic and OCD. And once I learned about Ash's diagnosis, what it looked like, how it manifested, the first thing that came to my head is, oh my God, this is Mike. Our spices are alphabetized. Our CDs were by genre and then alphabetized. The whole how you pack the dishwasher argument, it was a serious thing in our household. And I accommodated because I'm like, it doesn't matter to me and this is how he likes it and whatever. But then after Ash's diagnosis, I realized this is going to sound weird, but I couldn't touch him in bed. It's not like we didn't have a sexual life, but I couldn't physically touch him while he was sleeping. He couldn't comfortably do that. Loud noises, he'd have these really big reactions to, which is really hard when you have infants and toddlers, right? Because they have really big reactions. And then Ash, knowing Ash was high functioning autistic and OCD, Ash into their early teens kept having these big reactions. And Mike at his very worst, I would say one of his worst moments with Ash had a moment. They were freaking out. They were breaking down. I said, you know what? Let's go to your room. Let's reset. And I said, do you want me to stay or do you want some time on your own? And they said, I want some time on your own. I said, you hit your pillow, you scream, this is your safe space. And I walked away. And I think I went to the bedroom or the bathroom, and I hear Mike open the door and say, is that really effing necessary? Knock it the F off. And he slams the bedroom door. And I bet Ash was 9. And that moment solidified in my brain that, okay, this is who Mike is. We have all been adjusting to what Mike needs, but how do we still do that and feel safe and authentic with who we are? So around 2016, 2017, I asked him to go to couples therapy. The kids, I asked them to go to therapy with the kids. I had to talk to the therapist, and they're like, have the kid ask him. And then the kid asked, and Mike's like, why are you emotionally manipulating the kids to ask me to go to therapy? Like, he just did not believe in it. So we never went, but we were learning how to ask for what we needed. In 2018, I went to a divorce attorney because I realized so much to tell you guys. But I got into the whole mommy deserves wine. And I never drank when I was going to be driving. But we always had a stock shelf. It was one of our perks or one of our points of pride that we could finally afford top shelf liquor, and we didn't drink it. It was just there, right? But when I realized I was unhappy, I was invisible, I couldn't be who I wanted in my household, I was watching my kids suffer, I started drinking once I got home. And eventually, he and I had to come to Jesus about that. I quit drinking for 3.5 years to make sure I didn't have a problem, right? I was never hospitalized. Thank God. I was never in a situation where we had to bring the kids to the emergency room. So 2018, I finally saw a divorce attorney. I had been talking to my sister about how I'm making lists of when Mike is super sweet and super kind to me to remember why I married him. And my sister, who had been married 19 years at the time, said, honey, if you're making lists, not enough. And for the majority of our marriage, I was the breadwinner. Kind of the second half of our marriage, he found a career that worked and was not doing music. Neither of us went into our degrees. And he was the breadwinner. I had kind of desperately wanted to get out of insurance. And so I kind of started over. And she said, how are you going to support yourself? And then she said, is Mike going to be a good divorced partner? And I'm like, no. And then she said, will he help the kids with their meds or with getting them to lessons? I said, he doesn't believe in meds. He doesn't believe in therapy. And my youngest is still asking me to drive them to lessons. And so the kids remember us having these huge, huge screaming arguments on the back deck. They could hear us inside the house. Like, we'd go out and say, we need a break, a mommy and daddy break, right? But then we'd have these arguments. There weren't many, but I bet there were a good 4 or 5, and they were hard. And I told him I wanted a divorce, and he's like, this is not what I want. And I'm like, I know. I said, but this is what the kids need. This is what I need, and you aren't willing to provide it. And then something happened. He started trying. A specific example is Jack came into the living room and said, Mom, do you have a minute to talk? And I'm like, yeah. And Mike leaned back in his recliner and said, secrets don't keep friends. And I looked at him and I'm like, just give me a minute. So Jack and I talked about what he needed. And I said, can I share it with your dad? And he said, yeah. And I shared it with Mike, and he was quiet. And I said, would you have wanted to be in on the conversation. He's like, no. I'm like, okay. Do you have any advice or support for your son that you want me to pass on? No. But he wanted to know what it was about. Mini, tiny step, right? And we came to our 20th wedding anniversary, and he decided to plan a trip for us. We never vacationed together. We never took couple trips. He would take the kids camping on like a dad fishing camping trip, and then I would take the kids and do something. But we never did anything all together. And anytime I asked, he'd be irritated with just the idea of it. And he planned this 20th wedding anniversary trip. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to be alone with him. I thought the kids deserved a big trip. They had never seen the ocean. You know, I'm like, if we're going to have a big trip, let's bring them with. We
Wait,
went on this.
There's no ocean in Iowa? This is news to me.
There are
Shocking.
wiener dog races, you guys.
There are at Prairie
Cornfields?
Meadows.
Yes.
And llama or alpaca races at
Mm.
Prairie Meadows.
See, I've never seen that. So,
Oh yeah, good stuff. Yeah, no oceans. So we went on this trip, and I was like, he was so kind. Like, I got sick, I got sun poisoning. He was so patient. He was so kind. You know, we read and laid around. We did a couple excursions. When I really wanted to do something, he'd do it. And I'm like, who are you? Right. And, you know, in terms of intimacy, we reconnected on that trip. And then he asked to cuddle afterwards. And I'm like, I can't touch you in bed. Who are you? And I'm like, is he trying? Is this who he is, but hasn't felt comfortable in his own skin, in his own space? It was just so confusing. And then those little efforts continued, and then he died.
Oh my god.
Like that trip was November, and he died in February.
So you lived in a life of extremes, it sounds like, right? Or it's like when you could plan on something, then it might change. So are you thinking that he had undiagnosed autism?
Yeah.
Because a lot of that sounds similar to kind of, I've been diagnosed with that. And it's
Yeah.
like everything is input overload.
Yes.
And it's like, as soon as I knew that, I'm like, oh, I'm not a jerk. I just like, I only have like 8 inputs today, but it's requiring like 128, which I don't have right now. And that's hard for the person, and it's hard for the people around the person. And then you have kids that are also dealing with their own things. And then there's you, who's a people pleaser, and you're like, well, I'm just trying to keep everybody alive. And then it's a whole lot of stuff to go through. And then you have the death, which is so much change, the biggest change. So I'm wondering if you could tell us, how have you coped with all the feelings? Because this is actually not an uncommon story where people are close to divorce or things are not good, and then the person dies. And yours seemed like it was starting to get a little bit better, but you didn't know if it was going to continue to get better. And so people struggle with having some elements of relief.
One of the most beneficial gifts I got right after Mike died was one of my mom's coworkers, who I had never even met, had a bookmark from hospice when her mom died. And it said, do not put your person on a pedestal. See them for who they were. And so when COVID happened, and I had a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old, and everything shut down, and I ended up quitting my job because I'm like, I have 2 grieving kids. I don't want them online all the day. I'm going to force them to go for walks. We made indoor mini golf courses. Like, you know, like I had to be a mom. I don't remember how it started, but like I would stub my toe and I would say, damn it, Mike. Or
yeah,
we'd get a storm. Right. Or the power would go out and we'd be like, damn it, Mike. Or like we just jokingly decided that Mike got out before COVID because he wouldn't want to wear a mask with his perfect mustache and beard. And so because he got the easy out, we were going to blame him for everything. And then as they got older, we had this joke that Dad never said, I love you. Rarely. And I think it was around Peabody Sherman movie time where one of them says to the other, I have a deep affection for you as well. Right. So Mike started saying, I barely tolerate you. I barely tolerate you. So I went out to Etsy and had someone embroider it, and I put it on my living room wall, and he thought it was the best thing. So we blamed Mike for stuff. We'd say we barely tolerate each other. We would, oh, I think what was the hardest is when the anger started with the kids. And the anger all circled back to what you were asking, Mel, about feeling safer and feeling guilty. We realized we were more comfortable in our space without him. And he was so good when he was good, but he often gave that good to his friends, his parents, his sister, his nephews, his work. At home, he was done. He was exhausted. And he was the 6'1", 280-pound opera singing baritone voice that when he was mad, he was scary. Right? And he never laid a hand on us. But God forbid we make him angry. And they realized how much more comfortable they were. And they joked about how much more talkative and silly I was. Oh, and that broke me. Because I'm like, what kind of mom have they seen? Right? What have I been holding back? And that's why I thought maybe participating in the podcast, we're all reinventing who we are after our person dies. But when I realized how much of myself I had compromised to keep the peace, gosh, everything from the paint colors in the house to if I could have a cat tower, it would have caused him chaos. And so I never even asked.
So all of this is so complex because, your bookmark said don't put him on a pedestal, but it's also that you don't want to tear him down either because it sounds like he's not a bad person. He's a very human person. I've yelled at my kids when I shouldn't yell at my kids.
Me too.
I've been overwhelmed. I've done things and out of just desperation on my own part, and so it's really complicated to have those feelings of this wasn't a bad person. This wasn't a monster. It was somebody who was dealing with their own really complicated shit. And you guys are thrown into the middle of that. And so to feel safer, to feel more comfortable, and then to be like, but it's not because he was a bad person. It's just because he had a lot of stuff going on too and wasn't really able to regulate that for himself. And we were trying to regulate that for him. So I'm sure you feel that way. And I bet your kids also have a lot of those feelings of like, he wasn't a bad human, but man, it's better now that we're not dealing with that.
And I think it's so hard because the littles don't remember. They don't remember the lullabies. They barely remember when we made them read a book before they could see the movie. And so I started Jack on Harry Potter. Well, but Dad can nail all the voices. So all of a sudden, Dad took over Harry Potter. So he has these memories of Dad's accent or Dad singing around the house, or Dad would decide we are speaking in German all weekend. And there will be no wiping of runny noses, right? Like he was so silly and fun. And then he was so intolerant. And luckily at, 12 and 14, based on those camping trips with Mike, he had exposed them to swear words and certain things that I felt they were a little young for. Like he always let the kids swear at dad camp with the other kids and the other dads.
That's so funny.
And so after the funeral, one of us said, God, he was such an asshole, but he was our asshole. Right?
Yeah.
And that's how we try to think of them. I did their first Christmas, I used Shutterfly and made a photo book of every single Christmas. I had pictures of them sitting on his lap while he read the Christmas story the night before Christmas, and the Grinch in the voices, of course. I try to break out pictures of camping trips. I have very few videos of him speaking in his accents or being silly, and because at this point, now that they're 16 and 18, all they remember is angry, intolerant dad. And my youngest, being now Ash instead of Lily and transgender, they're like, would dad even love me? And I said, of course dad would. Your dad was an opera singer. He wore makeup, he wore tights, he was on stage, like he is a friend of the gays. We are good. Of course he would love you. And in the back of my head, I'm thanking God that they are not there to butt heads as two people who are high functioning autistic and OCD and need it their way. And it would have been very different ways.
It's so hard because the thing that gives them their quote genius and fun and brilliance
Yes.
is also the downfall. And
Right.
so there are these elements where they have control. So it's like, well, I'm deciding that we're going to read in German. So he's in control. And it's like, great, we'll do that as long as he wants, right? And then when he's done, he's probably done. I'm just kind of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, or like intervene if I'm wrong, or not surprised that he's an Elvis impersonator because sounds like he has a big personality that's fun and was good at the different voices, character things, dressing up, and it's really common in I mean I'm a musician, so the artist community too. So it's like these are my people. I'm like, yeah, this is totally quote normal, typical. But then in regular life, those are the things that prevent people like that from having stable or stability and predictability in their own life. Because what do you control? The other people in your house. And that doesn't work very well, obviously. And then there's you guys that have to deal with that. And that's so hard because how do you know when he's going to switch? Or what if there's not an end time to the fun? That is maybe fun for you, but not fun for him. And I'm wondering if Ash would have become Ash or been felt safe becoming Ash if he was alive. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't know. Mike never treated little Lily, like daddy's little princess, right? Like when there was construction that we were doing around the house, Ash wanted Lily Ash wanted bookshelves in their room. Dad's like, all right, you're going to help me build them. Put safety glasses on the kid, helps with the measuring, like incorporates them in all the stuff, right? And as long as he had the patience that day to have Ash in there helping, he did. I don't think he would care that Ash was gay or went to dances with a same gendered person or wore tuxes. I think more what would have been hard is Mike self-medicated binging alcohol at his friend's house or occasionally at our house to deal with hanging out with us or hanging out with his family. And Ash, when Jack got into therapy, it was like a year later we got Ash into therapy because I'm like, okay, this is good. This is working. We're going to figure out how we're going to know that dad loves us, but we're going to figure out how to talk to dad, ask for what we need, not be afraid. And of course, then I'm sure Mike felt left out too, because the three of us became pretty tight with our therapy and our whatnot. But
with your voodoo and whatnot. you
with
meant to
our
say.
voodoo
Correct.
and whatnot. But yeah, no, I think Mike's self-medicated, and when he hit that limit, he would drink. And same as me, for the most part, he didn't drive and drink. He didn't go to bars. We had a friend who turned his garage into a Bears bar. And every Bears game, this Bears friend is also English, so he's a soccer fan. So 2 a.m., come watch the game, start drinking, right? Like, I mean, whatever it was. But Mike would come home drunk, whether he drove himself or got an Uber. And then if we had family plans, I found out from his best friend that he would drink at the event or whatever and be like, okay, I got to go. I have to be with my family. And he'd do like 4 shots before he got in the car to come home. So he could suffer through the chaos of things not falling into line in a way that was comfortable for him. I thought he was drinking because he didn't like us for years, and I couldn't figure that out.
Do you know what his family, his nuclear family, thought about all of this?
They didn't like that he drank so much. Um, they still saw him as the golden child. He would show up and was everybody's favorite. And after he died and after COVID, the world loosened up and we started hanging out with them again after isolating just the three of us so much. We saw certain characteristics in his parents that were in Mike. The difference was we didn't have the same relationship to them as we did with Mike or Dad. And so that relationship has become very difficult because it's not that we don't love you, but the way that they share their opinion is so blunt and so hurtful. And coming from Dad, it would be one thing. Coming from Grandpa or Grandma is a completely different one. And they want very little to do with them. And I tried very hard to bridge that gap. And then my therapist said, let it go. The kids are old enough. They can reach out directly to the kids instead of going through you. But now, like with Jack's graduation party coming up, my mother-in-law had a question. She wanted a picture of Jack in his gown on graduation day, but she called me to ask. And I said, I don't see why it's an issue. I'll ask Jack and get back to you if that's okay. And then in therapy, she had said, you might have just wanted to refer her to Jack. But I have concerns about if that relationship will continue because they remember Fun Mike too. The sad thing is that's all they remember.
The parents.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
We're not allowed to bring up anything negative. In the beginning, we weren't even allowed to bring up his name when we all got together. The room just went silent. And that was really hard because we talk about him every day. We blamed him for stubbed toes, right?
It's a nice thing. Like, I mean, in a way, quote, nice thing to have a dead guy to blame stuff on, right? Just anything stupid and innocuous.
Yeah.
So has it been 4 years?
Yeah.
Ish? Okay. What is something that you're currently dealing with that you would want someone else who's lived a similar experience to know?
I think the hardest thing is how my body has reacted. Relatively early on, I don't know where I got the book, but it was during COVID. We weren't going anywhere. And somebody gave me the book, Is It the Body Keeps the Score?
Yes,
Mel's
the best
favorite
book of all time.
Right?
Yes.
I was like, this makes so much sense. And then 4 years out, and I have had more dental issues, crowns, a gum graft. I gained 30 pounds of grief weight over COVID, right? I call it my COVID 30. I'm back in physical therapy for back pain because I had a breast reduction years ago. Oh yeah, those suckers grew right back.
Rude.
Right? And then I finally, all my medical tests for my primary care provider showed that I was within normal range. My former primary care provider became a functional doctor and refuses insurance and says, you know what, we're gonna do whatever tests we need to do. And I finally went to her, and all the blood work that showed I was within normal range was I had like 9 areas that were precancerous based on high inflammatory symptoms.
See? Yep.
And it's
Yes.
so fixable and it's so doable. But if you don't know it's there, and she puts me on a couple supplements, vitamin D and magnesium, and we talked about anti-inflammatory diet and food, started EMDR, because of course, all 3 of us ended up diagnosed with PTSD, from finding Mike and experiencing trying to resuscitate him. But yeah, my body is still fighting at 4 years out. And that has been the biggest surprise to me because I'm fully functional. The kids are fully functional. We pay the bills. I go to work every day. I try to exercise. We have pets that haven't died, plants that haven't died, right? Like
What?
I know we're doing all the things. And yet, my body is still angry.
I want to support this statement because I'm 6.5 years out, and similar situations, like especially with the inflammatory stuff. Like
So angry.
I've had to I'm like currently right now in this huge rehaul that anything that I eat has to promote healthy digestion and help my body with inflammation. You can tell, this because I
Hmm.
know you live this. It's like you eat one thing that's not in that after you've kind of acclimated your digestion towards that, and your body is screaming at you. And I'm like, wow, is this because I'm like getting old? I'm not that old, but but I did go through all these traumas. I have a complex story, as you know, because you listen to podcasts, and and it is so true. There's all you can do, take care of your body, listen to your body. And I'm so glad that you mentioned that book because I think we think after a certain amount of time, it's like, well, I'll be okay because, it's been a long time, relatively speaking. And it is with you. And I'm sure you listened to Melissa Ponder Brackman's second episode, right? Where she was the one whose the first husband got killed by a serial killer. And then
Yes.
after that, she married a cop and he just died like 3 years ago or something.
Yes.
And she goes, now I'm in EMDR and everything's coming out and I have shoulder problems. And that's her finally facing all this complex stuff. So thank you for saying that. I think that that's something that we deal with. And we're also kind of in that age range where it's like, well, is it menopause? Is it perimenopause?
Right. I think, well, I have to verify your comment on digestion because I was getting treated for a stomach ulcer I didn't have. They sent me for an upper and lower GI, and they're like, yeah, no, you're good. But the doctor had said that when an organism is created, it's like the brain and the stomach. And after that, the rest of the organism is created. So, like when your brain is stressed or overfunctioning, it absolutely goes right to digestion. And that is definitely a big part of it. I've looked into, with the help of the functional doctor, which I'm so grateful for her, but I've told her I can't afford her anymore. We did not have a lot of life insurance. I barely make enough to pay the bills. I lost Jack's Social Security this month because he's graduating and not going to college. And like my mortgage is like $800. Like we don't live crazy, right? But I don't make enough to pay for her. But my functional doctor started me on an anti-inflammatory diet. This is not a plug because I just started it, but I started Hungry Root. And she wanted me on anti-inflammatory and anti-dairy. And the anti-dairy is only because of how cows are raised in the US. She said if we lived in Europe, I wouldn't have to be anti-dairy because there's different standards for what they use in the cattle.
Oh, I thought it was like an issue with how they're disciplined, like if they're gentle parented or if they have timeouts.
If they have massages and are
Yeah.
grass-fed, if they sing kumbaya,
If they're
yeah.
Kobe beef.
Kobe, you're right. No, yeah. So diet, I being ADHD, meditation is not going well. I have tried so many apps.
I just
have
fall
tried,
asleep.
Yes, me too.
right? And then I sit still and I think of all the things I should be doing or could be doing, or it feels like a huge waste of time. But, to aid my EMDR, before my back pain started up again, I was rowing just to get physical again. And there's a rhythm in rowing, right? But it's not bilateral. And so I went back to walking, just walking slow in my grandma shoes with my grandma inserts, with my very hyper 4-year-old puppy. But yeah, so walking, and the walking is not only for physical exercise, but it is like 85% mental health. There is
So
a
true.
peace in that movement.
Keep moving.
Yeah, keep moving.
Thank you for sharing your story. We have a lot of stories where the marriage was super happy and it was like, it was like a Disney movie and he was my Prince Charming and I was his Princess Leia because those two go together or whatever. And then we have some of the flip side of that where it's like he was abusive, he was a terrible person, was addicted to alcohol or drugs or bipolar or like a lot of really heavy duty situations, and yours kind of hits me as being somewhere in the middle. Like it wasn't great and it wasn't I don't want to minimize it by saying it wasn't terrible because it probably felt really hard, but it
At
wasn't.
times.
Yeah, it wasn't on that side of like
No.
a really abusive relationship either.
It
So
wasn't predictable
yeah, so I
all the
mean, it's
time.
just I think a lot of people probably fall in that category, where it's kind of in the middle of really great and awful, and it's hard. It's like you said, he was trying, but you didn't have a crystal ball, so you didn't know if it was going to keep going that way or if, your marriage would have ended in divorce. Like you don't know.
Right.
And your situation with Ash is really, I mean, that adds a lot of just interesting dynamics to it too, because that kind of a change in a life is a stressful, even in like a good marriage, because we just want to protect our kids and we want them to be happy. And that's a hard thing to predict, in big decisions like that and trying to support them through things like that. So thank you for being open and sharing some of those vulnerable things and just being there for others to learn and to identify with.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your story because these are hard topics. And again, a lot of people don't like to talk about them themselves. So for somebody to come forward and speak about them, I know that they feel seen and validated and that they're not alone. So thank you. And we have a last question, but I'm sorry about your dairy situation. But if you could eat dairy, what's your favorite cheese? Or what's your favorite dairy alternative?
I still cheat. It's okay. Yeah. So my favorite is how it's prepared. So my favorite is a sliced Maytag blue cheese on a cracker with honey and prosciutto. It's that bitter and sweet. Yeah, Maytag blue, very, very Midwest. But I also had something funny about cheese I wanted to share. My children grew up with not mozzarella sticks or string cheese or Kraft cheese. We called it stick cheese, square cheese, and shaky cheese.
Shaky cheese?
Wait.
Yeah, like
Oh,
the
yeah,
grated
Parmesan.
Oh,
right?
I'm like, is it like squeaky cheese? Because we
yeah,
have
that's
that
what I
here.
thought too.
No. But when they were
Shaky
little,
cheese.
they couldn't remember mozzarella or Kraft or American, right? So it was stick cheese, square cheese, and shaky cheese.
Aw.
Oh, that's cute.
I thought
I
you'd
just
enjoy that one.
I just thought they
I
were
do.
whole different products, and I was like, okay, but now I see what's going on. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you want to support the podcast, check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/WWDN.
If you'd like to buy us tacos, go to buymeacoffee.com/widowwedonoww.
And we always appreciate a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps people to find the podcast when they really need to. So help us out.
Yeah, do it.
Okay. And until we get to talk to you again, I'm Anita.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Kimmie.
We are just two young widows and one ADHD widow with a crazy story. And we're all just trying to figure out widow
We
do
now. This is my favorite thing to discuss with you.
Tell me, what is it?
One of my favorite things. I do enjoy tacos and cheese and dogs. This is about how you cannot pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a phone plan, especially when you're a widow, your person is dead, you might have kids, you might need another option, and you just want your phone to work, you want unlimited texting and service, and you want it to be like $25 a month.
It blows my mind that they have plans that start at $15 a month. That is so cheap. And the cool thing is it uses other 5G networks, and so you don't have to pay extra for that, and you still get great service.
Yep, Anita and I have traveled all over, and I have used my phone. So I highly recommend it. And my mom's even on it. When my dad died, we put his phone down to the cheapest plan, which is $15 a month. And I think my mom's on the $20 a month plan, and it's so worth it. It's so much cheaper than what we were all paying before. So I highly recommend it if you're on a budget or not. Who cares? Ryan Reynolds is in charge of the company, and they send you free stickers with Ryan Reynolds temporary tattoos. It's kind of the best. So if somebody wants to sign up, what can they do, Anita?
Go to trymintmobile.com/WWDN. Seriously, you guys, such a great idea. Save yourself some money.
And if you're worried about losing data or having any changes with your phone, not going to happen. They walk you through it. Everything's fine. It's the easiest process of all time. Again, that's
trymintmobile.com/WWDN.